The smell of rain hung in the September air, a cool promise that clung to the curtains of our bedroom window that morning. George kissed my forehead before he left for his shift, his hand resting for a moment over mine on the swell of my belly. "Take care of our little miracle," he whispered, his voice warm with the sleepy sincerity of early morning. "Our little miracle?" The words were a soft, repeating melody in my mind as I navigated the polished corridors of Metropolitan General Hospital. A few hours later, my hands rested protectively over my 8-month pregnant belly, balancing a thermal bag that held his favorite sandwich turkey and Swiss on sourdough, with that expensive whole-grain mustard he loves so much. We had tried for 3 years. 3 years of scheduled hopes and crushing disappointments. 3 years punctuated by 2 heartbreaking miscarriages that had left a quiet hollowness in our home. When we finally saw those 2 impossibly bright pink lines on the test, George had cried. Actually, truly cried, holding me in our sun-drenched kitchen as if I were the most fragile, precious thing in the world. Dr. Violet Louise. I practiced the name in my head, a whisper against the rhythmic squeak of my sneakers. I was only 6 months away from defending my dissertation in psychology. George was already planning our future in vivid detail. A house with a yard. Weekend barbecues with friends. The day he would teach our daughter to ride her first bike. A perfect life, sketched out and waiting for us. I pushed open the heavy door to the cardiology wing, my swollen ankles protesting with each determined step. The afternoon shift was a hum of controlled chaos, nurses bustling between rooms. The steady, reassuring beep of hard monitors. The faint, clean scent of antiseptic. George's office was at the very end of the hall, his nameplate gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Dr. George Louise. Cardiology. My heart swelled with a familiar, easy pride. He saved lives. He was my husband. We'd met during my undergraduate years. I was a volunteer, sorting patient files, and he was a resident, all confidence and charming smiles, with dark eyes that seemed to see right into my soul. "You're going to change the world, Violet," he told me on our 3rd date, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. "And I want to be right there beside you when you do." I knocked softly on his office door, expecting to hear his warm, familiar voice call out, "Come in." Instead, there was only silence, followed by a strange, shuffling sound. Maybe he's with a patient, I thought, though a flicker of unease went through me. I checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. His schedule, which I knew by heart, showed he should be free. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The thermal bag slipped from my fingers, hitting the linoleum floor with a dull, final thud. The sandwich I had made with so much love was forgotten. George was there. He was pressed against his desk, his white coat hanging open, his hands tangled in the fiery auburn hair of a woman whose face I recognized immediately. Stacy Ryder, the new nursing supervisor who had started a few months ago. The woman who always seemed to find a reason to stop by our table in the hospital cafeteria. Her smile bright but her eyes holding a strange, cold assessment. The woman who complimented my pregnancy glow just last week, while her gaze felt like ice against my skin. They were kissing. Not a gentle kiss, but a desperate, hungry one. Her legs were wrapped around his waist, her navy blue scrubs wrinkled beneath his searching hands. Medical charts lay scattered on the floor beneath them, casualties of their passion. His hands roamed her body with a practiced familiarity that screamed this was not the first time. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a well-rehearsed routine. Time fractured. It slowed down and stretched out, allowing me to see every single, soul-crushing detail. I watched my husband's hands, same hands that had caressed my pregnant belly that very morning, promising to protect her, miraculously exploring another woman's body. I watched Stacy's fingers working at the buckle of his belt with an urgency that made my stomach heave. I watched my entire world, the beautiful life we were building, crumble into dust in the space of 30 seconds. A sound tore from my throat, something between a gasp and a sob. A raw, animal noise of pure pain. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers caught by a teacher. George's face went ghost white, then flushed a deep, mottled red. Stacy, however, simply smoothed down her uniform. Her lipstick was smeared, her hair disheveled, but her eyes were bright with a chilling, malicious satisfaction. "Violet," George stammered, his voice cracking, taking a step toward me. "Don't." The word was a fragile whisper, all the air stolen from my lungs. I tried to step back, but my legs felt like water. "Don't you dare say my name." Stacy laughed. She actually laughed. A light, tinkling sound that was the ugliest thing I had ever heard. She hopped off the desk, straightening her skirt. Well, this is awkward. Her voice was breezy, amused, as if she'd been caught sneaking a cookie before dinner, not shattering my marriage. George shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. Her gaze was fixed on me, predatory and intense. You know, Violet, I've been waiting for this moment. It's just exhausting pretending to be nice to you at all those boring hospital functions. Stacy, stop, George said, but his voice was weak, lacking any real conviction. Stop what? Darling, she purred, moving closer to him, her hand trailing possessively across his chest. Stop telling your wife the truth. That you haven't loved her in years? That you only stayed because you felt sorry for her after the miscarriages? Each word was a physical blow, a knife twisting between my ribs. That's not true, I managed to say, but my voice was a stranger's, thin and reedy. George's silence was the only answer I needed. It was a roar that deafened me. Oh, honey, Stacy continued, her tone dripping with a false, saccharine sympathy. Did you really think a man like George would be satisfied with someone like you? Look at yourself. You're swollen, waddling around like a cow. When's the last time you even saw your own feet? George, I pleaded, my voice breaking completely, turning to him, begging with my eyes. Tell her to stop. Tell her she's lying. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than hatred. It was pity. That hollow, gut-wrenching pity you give to something broken. Violet, we need to talk, he said quietly. But not here. Not like this. Not like this. A wild, desperate rage began to claw at my chest, shredding the shock. Not like what? George. Not like finding my husband with his tongue down another woman's throat? Not like discovering my entire marriage is a lie while I'm carrying your child. Our child, he corrected, his voice low. Stacy's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Is it? Though, George, didn't you tell me you were worried? All those psychology conferences she took during her fertile windows? The implication was so vile, so poisonous. It stole my breath. How dare you? I whispered, my hands flying to my belly, a primal need to shield my baby from their filth. How dare either of you? Oh, please, Stacy interrupted, taking a confident step toward me. The grieving wife act is getting old. George and I have been together for 8 months. 8 months. Violet, do the math. 8 months. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. My pregnancy was 8 months along. Their affair began right after I got pregnant. Right after George had held me in the kitchen, his tears of joy dampening my hair. The foundation of my happiness was built on his lies. Something inside me snapped. The grief turned to ice, then to fire. Get away from my husband, I said, and my voice was no longer weak. It was low and steady. Your husband. Stacy's eyes glittered. Honey, he hasn't been your husband in any way that matters for a very long time. Trust me. I would know. She moved closer, and I could smell her perfuming a heavy, cloying scent I now realized I'd noticed on George's clothes for months. A scent I'd foolishly dismissed as just something from the hospital. In fact, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A secret meant only to break me. He was with me the night you went into false labor last month. Remember how he said he was stuck in a last-minute surgery? He was stuck. All right. Stuck between my... Stop, I said, raising a hand as if to physically block the words. Just stop. But she wouldn't. She smiled. A cold, calculated expression that twisted her pretty features into something monstrous. You want to know what he says about you, Violet? How he complains about your neediness. Your constant crying over every little thing? How he wishes he'd never married you. Stacy. Enough, George finally said. But he still hadn't moved toward me. Hadn't tried to shield me. He just stood there, a spectator at the demolition of his own life. No, George. She deserves to know the truth. Stacy's voice rose, becoming shrill. She deserves to know that you've been planning to leave her after the baby comes. That we've already looked at apartments together. That you have been lying to her face every single day, while she waddles around playing happy. Pathetic housewife. The room began to spin. The fluorescent lights seemed to pulse and blur. I reached for the doorframe, needing to steady myself, needing to escape. But Stacy was suddenly there, blocking my path. a cruel smile playing on her lips. Where are you going? Violet. Running away? That's what you do, isn't it? Run from anything difficult. No wonder George needed a real woman. Move, I said. My voice a low growl. Make me. The challenge hung in the air between us. I looked past her. To George. My eyes sending one last desperate plea. Do something. Say something. Be the man I thought I married. He just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor, a monument to cowardice. My gaze hardened. Move, I repeated, my voice stronger now, fueled by pure adrenaline. Stacy's smile widened. Or what? You'll call your uncle? Run crying to Director Stinson about how the mean girls are picking on you? My blood ran cold. My uncle, Elliot Stinson, was the director of the hospital. He'd helped me get the volunteer position where I'd first met George. He'd walk me down the aisle at our wedding. I had never, ever used his position to my advantage. That's right. Stacy sneered, seeing the shock register on my face. We know all about your precious family connections. It's amazing what a man will tell you in bed, isn't it? George finally spoke. His voice strained. Stacy, you're going too far. Am I? She whirled to face him, her auburn hair whipping through the air. Am I going too far? Or am I finally being honest? This woman has been living in a fantasy for years. George. Someone had to wake her up. She turned back to me, her face inches from mine, her breath hot and smelling of coffee and mint. Your husband doesn't love you. Your marriage is over. And frankly, looking at you now, I can't blame him for wanting something better. That was when I made my move. I wasn't thinking. I was just reacting. A cornered animal trying to escape the trap. I tried to push past her. Her hand shot out and shoved me backward. Hard. The force was surprising. Brutal. My pregnant body, already off balance and clumsy, stumbled. I flailed, my hands reaching for anything to grab onto. But there was only air. I hit the ground hard, landing on my side with a sickening jolt. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder. But it was nothing. Nothing compared to the agony that came next. My hands flew instinctively to my belly, trying to shield her miracle. Stacy stood over me, her face a mask of pure, triumphant rage. Stay down, she hissed, her voice venomous. Stay down where you belong. And then, in a moment that would be seared into my memory forever, a moment that would haunt my nightmares, she drew back her foot, shot in a practical nurse's clog, and kicked me. She kicked me directly in my pregnant belly. The pain was indescribable. It wasn't just physical. Though the sharp, searing agony was excruciating, it was a violation so profound it felt like my soul was being torn apart. I curled into a tight ball around my unborn child, a strangled cry escaping my lips as I saw her raise her foot to do it again. Stop! The voice that boomed through the room wasn't George's. It was deeper, colder, and filled with an authority that commanded absolute obedience. What in God's name is going on in here? My uncle, Elliot Stinson, stood in the doorway. His face, usually calm and composed, was a mask of absolute, unrestrained fury. Behind him, two nurses peered in, their faces pale with shock. The color drained from Stacy's face. The predatory confidence vanished, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror as she realized who had just witnessed her assault. Director Stinson, she stammered, taking a clumsy step back from me. I can explain. Explain this, Uncle Elliot said, his voice lethally quiet. He was across the room in 3 long strides, kneeling beside me as I writhed on the cold floor. His hands were gentle but urgent, checking my pulse, his eyes scanning me for injuries. Someone call 911. Now, he barked at the nurses, who immediately scrambled to obey. Uncle Elliot, I gasped, trying to push myself up. The baby. Don't move. Sweetheart. Just breathe. Help is coming. His voice was calm, the professional tone of a seasoned hospital director taking control of a crisis. But when he looked up at George and Stacy, I saw a storm brewing in his eyes that terrified me more than anything else. George finally snapped out of his paralysis. Violet. I'm so sorry. I didn't know she would. Shut up. Uncle Elliot snarled, his voice so cold it could freeze blood. Don't you say another word. Either of you. As the distant wail of sirens grew closer, a warm, wet gush spread between my legs. My water had broken. But it was too soon. 8 months was too early. The baby's coming, I whispered, pure terror finally eclipsing the rage as the first real contraction ripped through me. Fierce and demanding. Uncle Elliot squeezed my hand, his grip a lifeline in the swirling chaos. We're going to take care of you, Violet. You and the baby. Everything is going to be all right. But I saw the deep worry etched around his eyes. And in that moment, as paramedics burst through the door, as George stood frozen against the wall like a statue of regret, and as Stacy cowered in the corner, a silent, cold promise took root in my heart. A promise to my unborn daughter. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had no idea who they had just declared war on. The delivery room at Metropolitan General had witnessed thousands of births, but it had never seen one born from such a violent betrayal. As my daughter fought her way into the world 8 weeks early, I felt something else being born alongside her, a cold, calculating fury that settled into my bones like winter frost. Every contraction that ripped through me was a reminder of Stacy's foot. Every push a declaration of war. I named her Mabel. For my grandmother. A woman who had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and a cheating husband with a spine made of steel. When they placed her on my chest for a fleeting moment, she was so impossibly small, weighing barely 4 pounds. Her skin was translucent, her cry a fragile, reedy sound. But as she was whisked away to the NICU, our eyes met, and I saw it. A fierce, unbreakable spark. She was a fighter, just like the women in our family. She's going to be fine. Violet, Dr. Beckham, the on-call obstetrician, assured me, her voice a calm anchor in my storm. She's small, but she's strong. Her lungs are developed enough, and all her vital signs are stable. As they wheeled me to a private recovery room, Uncle Elliot walked beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. His silver hair was disheveled. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, but his presence was a fortress. I've been in contact with our legal department, he said, his voice low and grim, and I have suspended both Dr. Luis and Ms. Ryder, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Suspended. I repeated, the word sounding foreign and distant through the haze of medication. Violet, what happened today? What I witnessed, that was a felony assault. It happened in my hospital. To my family. His jaw was set in a way I remembered from childhood. The look he got right before he faced down the schoolyard bullies who'd once picked on me, at a family picnic. This isn't just a personal matter anymore. This is a criminal one. Through the fog of exhaustion and painkillers, I heard voices in the hallway. George's, high and pleading. Then Stacy's, sharp and defensive. Uncle Elliot stood up, his movements deliberate. He walked to the door of my room and opened it just enough to step into the hall, his broad back blocking the entrance. If either of you comes within 50 feet of my niece or her daughter again, he said, his voice carrying with chilling clarity down the corridor, I will have hospital security remove you from the premises permanently. Consider this your only warning. Elliot, please. George's voice cracked. I need to see her. I need to explain. You need to get yourself a lawyer. Dr. Luis. Uncle Elliot cut him off. Both of you do. The sound of retreating footsteps followed, and my uncle returned to my bedside. They're gone, he said, his expression softening as he looked at me. And they won't be back. I closed my eyes, but sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. Every time I drifted, I saw Stacy's face twisted in malice. I heard the deafening roar of George's silence when I begged for his help. I felt the brutal impact against my belly, a phantom pain that was worse than any physical ache. My fairy tale marriage hadn't just ended. It had revealed itself to be a horror story. My phone, retrieved from my purse by a kind nurse, buzzed on the bedside table. A text from my sister. Gina, on my way. Flight lands in 3 hours. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't make any decisions until I get there. My fierce, brilliant older sister, a corporate lawyer in New York known for her ruthless negotiation skills, and her ability to surgically dismantle her opponents in court. She had warned me about getting married so young. She had never quite trusted George's seamless charm. If I needed anyone in my corner right now, it was her. The next few hours were a blur of nurses checking my vitals, lactation consultants with gentle advice, and quiet conversations with Uncle Elliot about next steps. When Gina finally burst through my door at 11 p.m., her fiery red hair a wild halo around her face, I finally allowed myself to break. Oh, sweetie, she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft as she gathered me carefully into her arms. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Have you seen her? I whispered into her shoulder, my voice thick with tears. Mabel. First thing I did when I got here, she said, pulling back to look at me, her green eyes sharp and assessing. She's beautiful. Vi. Tiny. But perfect. She has your chin. And your stubborn streak. I can already tell. We sat in silence for a moment. Two sisters who had weathered every storm together. Gina had been my maid of honor, delivering a toast that was both loving and a thinly veiled warning to George to never hurt me. She had held my hand through both miscarriages, flying in from New York without a second thought. And she was here now, a bulwark against the ruins of my life. Tell me everything, she said finally, her voice regaining its usual steel. And don't leave out a single ugly detail. So I did. I told her everything. The kiss, every humiliating word from Stacy, every moment of George's betrayal and cowardice, the shove, the kick, the terror. Gina listened without interrupting, her expression growing colder and harder with each revelation. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Dangerous. They have no idea what they've done. Do they? She said, her voice dangerously quiet. What do you mean? Gina's smile was not a pleasant thing. It was sharp as a blade. Sweetie, they assaulted a pregnant woman, niece of the hospital director, in front of witnesses. Do you have any idea what that means? Legally speaking? I shook my head, too exhausted to think clearly. It means we're going to destroy them, she said, her voice a low, furious promise. Professionally, financially, and personally. By the time we're done, Stacy Ryder will wish she'd never been born. And George will finally understand that betraying a Louise woman was the single biggest mistake of his pathetic life. Gina, I just want. You want what? She cut me off, leaning forward, her voice intense. To forgive him. To try and work it out for the sake of the baby. Vi. Listen to me. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And some people deserve to face the full, unmitigated consequences of their actions. She pulled out her phone, her thumb scrolling rapidly through her contacts. I'm calling Melinda Florence. She's the best divorce attorney on the East Coast. And she owes me a favor. We're going to file for divorce, press for the maximum criminal charges, and make sure you and Mabel are protected and provided for the rest of your lives. I don't know if I'm ready for all that, I whispered. You don't have to be ready, Gina said, squeezing my hand. That's what I'm here for. You focus on healing and taking care of that beautiful little fighter in the NICU. Let me handle the war. Over the next week, as Mabel grew stronger ounce by precious ounce, Gina orchestrated what she grimly called Operation Justice. Melinda Florence, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes that couldn't quite hide the mind of a shark, came to see me in the hospital. I reviewed the initial police report and the hospital's incident report, she said, her voice calm and measured as she settled into the visitor's chair. Ms. Ryder has been charged with assault and battery. Given your pregnancy, those charges carry significantly enhanced penalties. We'll make sure the D.A. doesn't offer her any lenient plea deals. And George, the name tasted like ash in my mouth. Your husband's situation is more complex, Melinda explained. He wasn't the one who physically assaulted you, but he created the environment for the assault to happen. His infidelity, his failure to intervene. We'll be filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and citing extreme emotional distress. We will get you everything. She opened her briefcase. I need you to understand something. Violet, this is when you attract media attention. A prominent doctor, a violent mistress, a premature birth. The story has all the elements the press loves. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I thought of Mabel, fighting for every breath in her incubator. I thought of George's hands on Stacy's body. I thought of that nurse's shoe connecting with my belly. Let them look, I said, my voice clear and steady. I have nothing to hide. Melinda Florence smiled. A small, approving smile. And I understood why Gina had called her the best. Good, she said. Then let's begin. 3 weeks after Mabel's birth, I was finally able to bring her home. Home to the quiet suburban house where George and I had painted the nursery a hopeful, sunny yellow. Now, the silence of the house felt suffocating. Each room a mausoleum for a dead dream. Gina had taken an indefinite leave of absence from her firm and moved into the guest room, filling the house with her fierce, protective energy. She handled the endless stream of legal paperwork, screened all the calls, and woke up with me for the 3 a.m. feedings. A silent, steady presence in the dark. George has been calling, she told me one morning as I carefully fed Mabel her bottle. 15 times yesterday. Uncle Elliot had security issue a formal warning to stay off hospital property and threatened him with a restraining order. What does he want? The usual, Gina said with an unimpressed shrug. To see the baby. To explain. To beg for forgiveness. Melinda says we should document every single attempt at contact. It builds our case for sole custody. Custody. The word was a punch to the gut. The thought of sharing Mabel, of her spending weekends with that man, and potentially with her, was unbearable. He won't get unsupervised visitation, Gina said, reading my expression perfectly. Not after this. Melinda is confident about that. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from an unknown number. Violet. Please. I know I destroyed everything. But Mabel is my daughter too. Just let me explain. Let me try to make this right. I deleted it without responding, just as I had with all the others. The preliminary hearing for Stacy's assault charge was scheduled for the following week. Are you prepared to testify? Melinda had asked. I was more than prepared. I wanted to look that woman in the eye as I told the world exactly what she did. But as the days ticked by, I began to realize there were layers to this betrayal that I hadn't even begun to comprehend. It started with the insurance papers. Gina was helping me sort through the mountain of medical bills from Mabel's NICU stay, her lawyer's mind making order out of chaos. Suddenly, she went very still. VI, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Did you know George took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago? I looked up from folding a tiny onesie. No. I mean, we might have talked about it vaguely once we got pregnant, but I never signed anything. You wouldn't have to, she said, pushing a document across the kitchen table. He's your husband. He could take it out with your basic information. I picked it up. My name was at the top. The beneficiary was George Louis. The payout amount made the air leave my lungs. $2 million. VI. Did you know about this? Gina asked again, her eyes sharp with a concern that went beyond infidelity. No. I whispered. Why would he? I stopped, the unspoken question hanging in the air. The implications began to swirl, dark and terrifying. When did he take this out? Gina pointed to a date at the bottom of the page. March 15th. Right around the time his affair with Stacy started. I finished, the words tasting like poison. We stared at each other across the table. The peaceful gurgling sounds from Mabel and her carrier the only noise in the room. The policy felt heavy in my hands, like an artifact from a crime scene. People take out life insurance all the time, I said, trying to find a rational explanation. My voice sounding weak even to my own ears. Especially when they're expecting a baby. A $2 million policy on a graduate student with no significant income? Gina countered, her suspicion hardening into certainty. And he never told you about it. She was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling Melinda. And we need to talk to Uncle Elliot. We need to see George's financial records. A terrible thought. A slippery, monstrous idea began to form in the back of my mind. It was too horrible to voice. But Gina, ever the pragmatist, was already there. That false labor incident last month, she said quietly. Her eyes locked on mine. When George claimed he was in surgery but was actually with Stacy. What did you eat that day? VI. What did you drink? Did George bring you anything? My hands began to shake as the memory surfaced. Suddenly vivid and terrifying. He made me tea. I whispered. He said it was a special herbal blend from the hospital pharmacy. He said it would help with the Braxton Hicks contractions. And you went into false labor an hour later. It wasn't a question. We looked at each other, both afraid to say the words. But the pieces were clicking into place with horrifying speed. He's a cardiologist, Gina said slowly, thinking aloud. He has access to every kind of medication. Things that could induce contractions. Things that would be difficult to detect in a routine blood test. But why? My voice was a choked whisper. Why would he want me to go into labor early? Gina's face was pale, her expression grim. Because premature babies don't always survive. VI. And a grieving widower gets a lot of sympathy. She paused, letting the final, devastating piece fall into place. And a $2 million payout. The room seemed to tilt around me. The cheerful yellow walls of the nursery, visible from where I sat, suddenly felt mocking. a monument to my own naivete. I looked from Gina's grim face to the insurance policy on the table, then to my daughter, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that her existence had been a pawn in a deadly game. He hadn't just cheated on me. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had calculated my death. He had weighed the value of my life and Mabel's against $1 million, and decided we were worth less. "We need evidence," I whispered, the words scraping my raw throat. The psychologist in me knew that suspicion, no matter how strong, was not proof. "We'll get it," Gina said, her voice a blade. She was already in lawyer mode, her mind mapping out a strategy. "That tea. Do you still have it?" My blood ran cold. He threw the tea bag out. "But the canister, it's still in the pantry." "Good. Don't touch it," she commanded, already dialing Melinda Florence and putting her on speakerphone. In clipped, precise sentences, Gina laid out her horrifying suspicion. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Melinda's voice came through, devoid of any shock, as cold and clear as ice. "I have contacts at an independent forensic lab," she said. "Someone I trust implicitly. We can have the residue from the canister and any remaining tea leaves tested. But we have to be careful. George cannot know we suspect anything more than adultery." "What about the hospital?" I asked, my mind racing. "He must have gotten the drugs from there." "Let me handle that." Uncle Elliot's voice suddenly joined the call. "Gina must have patched him in. I can quietly pull Dr. Luce's prescription records and his pharmacy access logs for the past year. If he acquired misoprostol or anything similar through hospital channels, I'll find it." The plan was set in motion with a speed that left me breathless. While I focused on the 24-hour cycle of feeding, changing, and cherishing Mabel, a silent war was being waged on my behalf. Gina became the general. Her command center our kitchen table. She had security cameras installed around the house and the logs changed the very next day. "Just a precaution," she said, her tone casual. But I saw the way her eyes scanned the street before she went to bed each night. We were no longer dealing with a simple, messy divorce. We were living in a crime scene. The days that followed were a strange mixture of the mundane and the terrifying. I would be cooing up Mabel, marveling at the way her tiny fingers curled around mine. And then my phone would buzz with a text from Gina. "Melinda's guy has a tea. Results in 48 hours. I would be sterilizing bottles at 2 a.m. And Uncle Elliot would send a cryptic message, "Found something. Pharmacy logs show an anomaly on the date of your false labor." Every text from George pleading, desperate, manipulative and unanswered, saved as evidence. Every bouquet of funereal-looking apology flowers that arrived at the door was refused. The man I had married was a stranger, a monster hiding behind a charming smile and a white coat. I replayed months of memories in my head, now seeing them through a new, horrifying lens. The special vitamins he'd insisted I take. The smoothies he blended just for me. How many times had he tried? How close had I come? The thoughts made it hard to breathe, hard to sleep, hard to do anything but hold Mabel tighter. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was giving Mabel her bottle, watching the autumn sunlight stream through the window, trying to pretend for a moment that we were just a normal mother and daughter starting a normal day. Gina's phone rang, and she answered it, her face a mask of professional calm. "Melinda," she said, and my entire body went rigid. I watched my sister's face as she listened. I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped her phone. I saw her green eyes darken from concern to pure, unadulterated rage. She didn't say a word, just listened for a full minute before hanging up. She looked at me, and her expression was all I needed to see. "They found it," she said, her voice flat and hollow. "They found traces of misoprostol in the herbal tea." Melinda said the levels were subtle, not enough to guarantee a miscarriage, but more than enough to trigger premature contractions in a woman already at high risk. My legs gave out. I sank onto a kitchen chair, nearly dropping Mabel's bottle. My arms tightened around my daughter. My anchor. My reason. He really did it. The man who had wept with joy when he learned I was pregnant had systematically tried to poison me. To kill our child. To erase us. Why? I choked out. The question a ragged tear in the silence. "For the insurance money," Gina said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "And for his freedom. Freedom to be with Stacy. Free from debt. Free from us." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "Melinda is on her way to the district attorney's office with the lab results and the hospital records from Elliot. This changes everything. VI. This is no longer a divorce case. It's attempted murder. What happens now? Now, Gina said, her eyes glinting with a cold fire I had never seen before. We let the justice system do its work. George Luis is going to be arrested. And Miss Ryder was almost certainly complicit. Melinda will argue that she knew about the insurance policy. Maybe even helped him get the drugs. We're going to take them both down. Later that evening, Melinda came to the house. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her briefcase open, her expression serious but reassuring. The D.A. is taking this very seriously. Violet, she said. They are preparing arrest warrants for both George and Stacy. They'll be charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. She paused, her gaze softening. I need you to be prepared for what comes next. Once arrests are made, this will become public. Very public. The media will be fascinated by the story, the respected doctor, his pregnant wife, the violent mistress, the murder for insurance plot. Your name and your face will be everywhere. Was I prepared? A few weeks ago, the thought would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. The idea of my private pain being dissected on the nightly news was horrifying. But looking down at Mabel, sleeping in my arms, I felt a new kind of strength. They had tried to silence me, to turn me into a tragic headline and a life insurance check. They did not get to win. Let them tell the story, I said, my voice steady. The whole world should know what kind of man George Luis really is, and what kind of woman Stacy Ryder is. The arrests happened the next day. Uncle Elliot called to let us know. George was taken into custody at the hospital, in the middle of his rounds. A quiet, professional arrest that was nonetheless a public humiliation. Stacy was arrested at her apartment. The news broke that evening. My face was on every channel. A photo from my wedding day. There I was, beaming with a radiant, innocent happiness that now seemed like a cruel joke. Beside my smiling face was George's booking photo, his handsome features slack with shock and disbelief. And next to his, Stacy's, her face a pale, tear-streaked mess. Prominent cardiologist and nurse supervisor arrested, in shocking murder-for-hire plot against pregnant wife. The headlines were sensational, the details scant but sordid. My phone began to ring incessantly with calls from reporters, old friends, and distant relatives. Gina fielded them all, a fierce gatekeeper protecting me and Mabel from the storm. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. It was a crisp October morning, exactly 6 weeks after Mabel's chaotic entry into the world. I walked into the courthouse flanked by Gina and Melinda, a phalanx of cameras flashing in my face, reporters shouting questions. I kept my eyes straight ahead, my expression neutral, my hand clutching a small, framed photo of Mabel in my purse. George was there, dressed in an expensive suit, his face a mask of practiced indignation. He was flanked by high-priced defense attorneys I recognized from local television commercials. When his eyes met mine across the packed courtroom, I saw no remorse, no shame, only cold, hard calculation. He was already building his defense, crafting his narrative as a victim, not guilty. Your Honor. His voice was strong, confident. Stacy was broad in necks. She looked wrecked. Her perfect hair was lank, her face pale and drawn. She couldn't look at me. Not guilty, she whispered, her voice barely audible. As we filed out of the courthouse, the media descended, a chaotic swarm of microphones and cameras. Mrs. Luis, how do you feel about your husband's plea? Do you believe he really tried to kill you? Is it true your uncle is using his influence to frame them? Melinda guided me through the crowd, her hand a firm presence on my elbow. No comment, she repeated, her voice cutting through the noise. Mrs. Luis will make a statement at the appropriate time. But as we reached the curb, something inside me shifted. The fierce, protective instinct that had carried me through the last 6 weeks demanded to be heard. I was not a victim to be pitied. I was a survivor. I stopped. I have something to say, I told Melinda, my voice quiet but firm. She looked at me, concern in her eyes. Violet, we discussed this. It's better to. No. I turned to face the reporters. The shouting quieted as they realized I was about to speak. I found the nearest camera, my spine straight, and I let the cold, clear truth pour out. My husband, Dr. George Luis, tried to murder me and our unborn daughter for a $2 million insurance policy, so he could start a new life with his mistress, Stacy Ryder. I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. When his attempt to induce a miscarriage with drugs failed. Ms. Ryder physically assaulted me in my 8th month of pregnancy, kicking my stomach in an attempt to finish what he started. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Cameras clicked furiously. My daughter survived because she is a fighter. I continued, my voice unwavering. I survived because I am a fighter. George and Stacy are not victims. They are predators, and we will see them face the consequences of their actions in a court of law, where the truth will be revealed for everyone to see. I paused, looking directly into the camera lens, speaking not just to the reporters, but to anyone out there who had ever been made to feel small, worthless, or disposable. To any woman who has ever been betrayed, lied to, or harmed by someone who was supposed to love you, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve justice. Then I turned and got into the car, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. The game had changed. I had just fired the first shot in a war one had no intention of losing. But even then, I had no idea that the darkest secrets were yet to be revealed. The ride home from the courthouse was silent. Gina squeezed my hand, a gesture of fierce pride and solidarity. Melinda was on the phone, her voice a low, controlled hum as she fielded calls from legal colleagues and managed the media fallout from my impromptu press conference. When we pulled into the driveway of my new rented townhouse, a secure building with a doorman that Gina had insisted Uponi, felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a sliver of something else. Relief. The truth was out. The burden of pretending was gone. Rosa, the nanny Gina had hired, met us at the door. She was a former military police officer in her 40s, with a calm demeanor that radiated competence and a gaze that missed nothing. Mabel was cooing happily in her arms. All quiet here, Rosa reported in her clipped, professional tone, though there have been several attempts to deliver flowers in what appeared to be gift baskets. I've documented them, refused delivery, and logged the sender's information. Reporters, Gina muttered, taking Mabel from Rosa, or worse, George's family trying to get to you. That evening, I fed Mabel her bottle and watched the news. My statement was the lead story on every local channel. Pundits and legal analysts dissected my every word. Some praised my courage. Others, hired by George's legal team, were already starting to spin a different narrative. They painted me as a scorned woman, vengeful and unstable, using my powerful uncle to orchestrate a vindictive plot against a husband who had made a simple, human mistake. They're trying to discredit you, Melinda said over the phone later that night. It's a classic defense strategy. If they can't refute the evidence, they attack the victim's character. Don't let it get to you. But it was hard. The lies felt like tiny paper cuts, small but stinging. The thought that anyone could believe I would invent such a monstrous story was deeply wounding. Just as I was about to turn off the television, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number, but something made me answer. Hello? Is this Violet Louise? The voice was female, hesitant, with a slight southern accent that sounded stretched thin with nerves. Yes. Who is this? My name is Sarah Chin. I used to be a surgical technician at Metropolitan General. I saw you on the news. There was a pause, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I think I have information that you need to hear. My pulse quickened. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of information? About Stacy Ryder, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And about what really happened to Dr. Beckham. Dr. Beckham. The kind, competent doctor who had delivered Mabel. I'd heard through Uncle Elliot that she had resigned abruptly a few weeks ago, taking a position in another state. The official reason was a family matter, but the timing had always felt strange. Can you meet me? Sarah's voice was urgent now. Somewhere private. I'm afraid to talk about this over the phone. She still has friends at the hospital. We arranged to meet the next morning at a quiet coffee shop in a different neighborhood, far from the hospital. I told Gina, who insisted on coming with me for backup. We left Mabel in Rose's capable hands with strict instructions to call if anything seemed even remotely amiss. Sarah Chin was a petite woman in her early 30s, with large, worried eyes and hands that trembled so much she had to grip her coffee cup with both of them. Thank you for meeting me, she said, not making eye contact. I should have come forward sooner, but I was scared. I have a daughter to support. I couldn't risk my job. You don't work at the hospital anymore? Gina asked, her tone gentle but probing. Sarah shook her head. I quit the day after you were attacked. I couldn't I couldn't be a part of that place anymore. Knowing what I know, she finally looked at me, her eyes swimming with a mixture of guilt and resolve. What Stacy Ryder did to you, she's done it before. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Not the physical assault, Sarah clarified quickly. But the rest of it. The manipulation. The systematic destruction of another woman's life to get what she wants. She did it to Dr. Beckham. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a worn manila folder, sliding it across the table toward me. Dr. Beckham was married. 2 young kids. Her husband was a pharmaceutical sales rep who was at the hospital a lot. Stacy went after him, seduced him, just like she did with George. The pattern was sickeningly familiar. When Dr. Beckham found out and confronted them, Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Stacy turned the tables on her. She accused Dr. Beckham of being an addict, of stealing narcotics from the hospital pharmacy. Gina leaned forward, her lawyer instincts fully engaged. She made an accusation, but they would need proof. Stacy created the proof, Sarah said, her voice trembling. She was the nursing supervisor for the surgical floor. She had access to the medication logs, the inventory system. She started manipulating the records, making it look like small quantities of fentanyl and oxycodone were going missing during Dr. Beckham's shifts. She planted empty vials in Dr. Beckham's locker. I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of inventory sheets with dates and times circled in red. There were printed stills from a security camera, time stamped at 3 a.m., showing Stacy in the pharmacy, a place she had no official reason to be at that hour. I helped her, Sarah whispered, and tears began to stream down her face. I didn't know what I was doing. She told me there were discrepancies in the logs and she needed my help sorting them out. She had me sign off on inventory forms that she later used as evidence that medications had gone missing on my watch, corroborating her story about Dr. Beckham. The sheer, calculated evil of it was breathtaking. Dr. Beckham was suspended, Sarah said, her voice choked with sobs. The hospital board launched an investigation, but Stacy had covered her tracks so well. They found the vials in her locker. The manipulated logs looked legitimate. Dr. Beckham swore she was being framed, but it was her word against Stacy's and the evidence. Her husband divorced her, used the drug allegations to get sole custody of the kids. She lost her license, her job, her family. She lost everything. And Stacy? I asked, my voice a hollow echo. Stacy got a promotion a month later for her vigilance in uncovering a critical patient safety issue. Why didn't you say anything? Gina asked, her voice soft, free of judgment. I was terrified, Sarah admitted. Stacy made it clear that if I ever breathed a word of it, she would make it look like I was Dr. Beckham's accomplice. She said she could ruin me just as easily. So I kept my mouth shut. But then I saw what happened to you. When I realized she was capable of physically attacking a pregnant woman, I couldn't live with the silence anymore. A new layer of the story was unfolding, one that painted Stacy not just as a jealous mistress, but as a sociopathic predator. I thought about Dr. Beckham, the woman who had so calmly guided Mabel into the world, all while her own life was in ruins, destroyed by the same woman who had caused my trauma. There's more, Sarah said, taking a shaky sip of her coffee. I think she was planning to frame you, too, in a different way. What do you mean? She was asking questions about you for months. Subtle things. Asking other nurses if they knew about your family, about your uncle's position. She was especially interested in your medical history. Sarah looked directly at me. She somehow found out you had a prescription for anxiety medication a few years ago, before you got pregnant. The prenatal vitamins. The anxiety medication I had responsibly stopped taking the moment I found out I was expecting. George had been so supportive of that decision. Or so I had thought. What was her plan? I whispered, dreading the answer. I overheard her talking to George once, Sarah said. She was laughing about it. She said if the stress of the pregnancy became too much for you, if something unfortunate happened to the baby, it would be easy to suggest that you had a history of mental instability, that maybe you'd been self-medicating, taking things you shouldn't have been, and had accidentally caused a miscarriage. The coffee shop suddenly felt airless. I gripped the edge of the table, the pieces of Stacy's monstrous plan clicking into place. If the misoprostol had worked, if I had lost Mabel, they wouldn't have needed the life insurance payout right away. Their first line of defense would have been to destroy my credibility. George, the grieving husband, standing by his unstable wife. Stacy, the concerned colleague, whispering suspicions in the right ears. They hadn't just planned to kill my baby and me. They had planned to assassinate my character, to make me the author of my own tragedy. Will you testify? Gina's voice cut through my horrified thoughts, sharp and focused. Will you tell the district attorney everything you've just told us? Sarah Chin looked from me to Gina, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of steely determination. She nodded. Yes, she said. That's why I called. I can't let her get away with it again. I can't let her hurt anyone else. We spent another hour with Sarah, meticulously going over the documents she had brought, recording her testimony on Gina's phone. By the time we left the coffee shop, the world felt like a darker, more dangerous place, but I also felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just about my family. It was about getting justice for Dr. Beckham. It was about stopping a predator before she could destroy another life. That afternoon, Melinda called, her voice buzzing with energy. The D.A. is ecstatic, she said. Sarah Chin's testimony establishes a pattern of criminal behavior. It makes Stacy look like a calculating sociopath, not a simple woman scorned. They're adding charges of evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perjury to her indictment. And George's lawyers? I asked. They're trying to cut a deal, Melinda said with a grim chuckle. They're trying to paint him as Stacy's victim, a good man manipulated by a master schemer. They are trying to separate his trial from hers. He is not a victim, I said, my voice hard as stone. He tried to poison me. I know. And we are not accepting any deal that doesn't involve him serving significant prison time. But this does complicate things. Even as our legal case grew stronger, a nagging feeling persisted. Stacy had seemed to compose at her arraignment for someone whose life was imploding. George's top-tier lawyers cost a fortune. He shouldn't have been able to afford on a doctor's salary alone. Something was still missing. The final piece of the puzzle arrived days later, not from a lawyer or a witness, but in a plain manila envelope delivered by a bike messenger. There was no return address. Rosa, ever vigilant, had scanned it for any threats before bringing it to me. This came about an hour ago, she said, her expression unreadable. It passed all security checks. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single 8x10 photograph and a small, typed note. The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed George and Stacy sitting at a table in what looked like a dimly lit restaurant booth. But they weren't alone. Sitting across from them, his face partially in shadow but instantly recognizable from news reports, was Vincent Caruso, a notorious loan shark and a known associate of a powerful East Coast crime family. I unfolded the typed note. The message was 5 short sentences. Your husband owed people money. A lot of money. The insurance policy wasn't just for his girlfriend. It was to stay alive. Thought you should know. A friend. I stared at the photograph. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. The expense of lawyers. George's desperation. Stacy's inexplicable confidence. It wasn't about love or a new life. It was about survival. George hadn't just been running from our marriage. He'd been running from the mob. Gina, I called out, my voice barely a whisper. You need to see this. She came into the kitchen, and I handed her the photo and the note. I watched her face go pale as she processed the horrifying implications. Oh, Violet, she breathed, looking from the photo to me. This isn't just about adultery and insurance fraud anymore. No, I said, my gaze falling on Mabel, who was napping in her bassinet. It's about organized crime, and people who kill for a living. The game hadn't just changed. We were on a whole new, terrifying board. The photograph felt like a live grenade in my hands. Every theory we had, every legal strategy we had built, suddenly felt small and inadequate. We weren't dealing with a cheating husband and his sociopathic mistress anymore. We were on the edge of a world filled with professional criminals, men for whom violence was not a crime of passion, but a tool of the trade. We have to call Melinda. Now, Gina said, her voice tight with urgency. And Elliot. This changes the entire risk profile of the case. Within the hour, we were in a secure conference call. I explained the anonymous delivery, the photograph, the note. On the other end of the line, I could hear Melinda's sharp intake of breath. Uncle Elliot was silent for a long moment, And when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a gravity I had never heard before. Vincent Caruso, he said. His name has come up before. Rumors of him using legitimate businesses as fronts for money laundering. We've even had unofficial warnings about some of our hospital suppliers having ties to his organization. The anonymous friend who sent this has put a target on Violet's back, Melinda stated, her tone blunt. By revealing George's connection to Caruso, they've made her a potential witness in a federal case. Caruso's people will not take that lightly. The fear was a cold, physical thing, quelling in my stomach. It was one thing to face George and Stacy in a courtroom. It was another thing entirely to be an enemy of the mob. My world, which had already shrunk to the confines of my home and the NICU, now felt like a cage. What do we do? I asked, my voice small. We go on the offensive, Melinda replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. I'm taking this directly to the U.S. Attorney's office. We're not dealing with the local D.A. anymore. This is racketeering. This is organized crime. This is an FBI matter. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and hushed, encrypted phone calls. We met with two FBI agents in a sterile, windowless room in a federal building downtown. Agent Rebecca Santos was the lead, a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of unflappable calm. Her partner, Agent Miller, was younger, bigger, and said very little. But his presence was a constant, watchful shield. They listened intently as I recounted the entire story. From the moment I opened George's office door to the arrival of the anonymous photograph, they examined the photo and the note under a magnifying glass, their faces giving nothing away. We've had our eye on Caruso's operations for a while, Agent Santos said when I had finished. We suspected he was laundering money through medical supply companies, but we could never find a solid link inside the hospitals. Your husband, Dr. Luis, appears to be that link. Working with financial investigators, the FBI quickly unraveled George's secret life. He had started with sports betting. Small at first, but his losses had escalated. He'd borrowed money from Caruso's organization to cover his debts, but the big exorbitant interest that buried him. Soon, he was in for over $3 million. He was trapped, Agent Santos explained, laying out copies of bank statements and wire transfers on the conference table. So Caruso offered him a way out. George started approving purchases of massively overpriced, often non-existent, medical equipment from supply companies that were secretly owned by Caruso. The hospital paid the invoices. The money was laundered, and George got a small percentage to live on, while the rest went to paying down his impossible debt. But it wasn't enough. I pieced it together, the cold logic of it chilling me to the bone. He was still drowning. Exactly. Santos confirmed. He was never going to get out from under them. So he came up with a different plan. A $2 million life insurance payout would have wiped his slate clean and bought him a new life with Ms. Ryder. The sheer coldness of his calculation was still staggering. He had been willing to trade my life and his daughter's for a clean ledger with the mob. The anonymous tip, Gina said. Ever the lawyer. Who sent it? A rival of Caruso's? Or someone inside his organization who wanted George out of the picture? Agent Santos theorized. Either way, it's given us the leverage we need. But to build a case that will stick, to take down Caruso's entire network, we need more than financial records. We need a confession. Her eyes met mine across the table. We need George to talk. And that was when she laid out their plan. An audacious, terrifying plan that made my heart hammer against my ribs. We want you to meet with him, she said. The silence in the room was absolute. Gina started to protest. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Agent Santos held up a hand. Hear me out. George's lawyers have been petitioning for a meeting to discuss custody arrangements for Mabel. They're trying to establish him as a concerned, repentant father. We will grant that meeting. It will be at your old house, a place he feels comfortable. You, Mrs. Luis, will be wearing a wire. The idea was paralyzing. To be in the same room with him again. To pretend. To act. He'll try to manipulate you, Agent Santos warned. He will cry. He will apologize. He will blame Stacy. He will blame Caruso. He will blame everyone but himself. Your job is to stay calm and guide the conversation. Get him to talk about the money he owes. Get him to admit Caruso was the reason for the insurance policy. Get him to admit the misoprostol was his idea. What if he gets suspicious? I asked, my voice trembling. What if he attacks me again? You will not be alone. Agent Miller spoke for the first time. His voice a low rumble. We will have a full tactical team in place. Agents will be disguised as gardeners, utility workers, neighbors walking their dogs. The house will be wired for audio and video. We will be listening to every word. If your heart rate elevates beyond a certain point, if you use a prearranged distress word, or if he makes a single aggressive move, we will be through that door in less than 3 seconds. You will be safe. Gina was vehemently opposed. It's an unacceptable risk. She argued passionately. There has to be another way. There isn't, Agent Santos said, her gaze fixed on me. George is arrogant. He believes he can charm his way out of this. He'll only be this candid with 1% woman he thinks he can still manipulate. The decision is yours, Mrs. Louise. But this is our best and only shot to get Caruso. I went home that night and sat for hours by Mabel's crib, watching her breathe. This wasn't just about George and Stacy anymore. It was about Vincent Caruso. It was about the network of criminals who preyed on the weak, who destroyed lives for profit. If I didn't do this, George might get a lighter sentence by playing the victim. Caruso might walk free, his operations untouched, ready to find another desperate man to exploit. They had tried to murder my daughter. They had brought their filth and violence into my life, and I had a chance to burn it all down. The next morning, I called Agent Santos. I'll do it, I said. The days leading up to the meeting were the most intense of my life. I met with a psychologist from the FBI who trained me in maintaining composure under pressure, in steering conversations without raising suspicion. We rehearsed scenarios, lines of questioning, and my escape plan. They fitted me for the wire, a tiny device hidden in the clasp of a simple silver necklace. It felt cold against my skin, a constant reminder of the danger. The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon. Melinda, through George's lawyers, had arranged it under the pretext that I was finally willing to discuss a potential supervised visitation schedule for Mabel, and that I needed to pick up some of her baby items I had left behind at the house. George, as predicted, had eagerly agreed. He saw it as a sign of weakness, an opening he could exploit. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, choosing a soft sweater and jeans, an outfit that was non-threatening, the uniform of the woman he thought he knew. I held Mabel for a long time, kissing her soft cheek, inhaling her sweet baby scent. Rosa held her as I prepared to leave, her expression grim. You come back safe, she said. It was an order, not a request. As I drove to my old house, the familiar streets of my former life looked alien. FBI surveillance vans were disguised as cable TV trucks. A man I knew to be an agent was jogging past the house with a golden retriever. The scene was perfectly, terrifyingly normal. I took a deep breath, touched the cold metal of the necklace, and walked up the steps to the front door. I was no longer just Violet Louise, a grieving wife and new mother. I was a federal witness, a hunter, and I was walking into the lion's den to bring the monster out. The door opened before I could knock. George stood there, and for a heart-stopping second, he looked like the man I had married. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but he had managed a small, hopeful smile. Violet, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance. I stepped inside, the hidden microphone recording the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. The trap was set. This isn't about second chances. George, I said, my voice colder and steadier than I felt. This is about Mabel. The house smelled of stale air and forgotten memories. A layer of dust coated the surfaces of what was once our life together. He had tried to make it look welcoming. A pot of coffee was brewing on the counter, and a box from our favorite downtown bakery sat on the kitchen table. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to rewind time, to pretend we were just a husband and wife about to have a difficult conversation. Of course, he said, his voice laced with a desperate sincerity that would have fooled me a few months ago. Of course, it's about Mabel. That's all that matters. He gestured toward the table. Please, sit. I made coffee. I remained standing, creating a physical distance between us. The FBI psychologist had told me to control the space, to not let him dictate the terms of the meeting. I'm not staying long. George, I'm here to get Mabel's things and to set some boundaries. His face fell, the hopeful mask flickering. Violet, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. I was weak. I let Stacy manipulate me. She was so persuasive. So aggressive. I never wanted any of this to happen. There it was. The opening move in his well-rehearsed script. Blame the mistress. Position himself as the weak, manipulated man. I had to steer him off that path, and onto the one Agent Santos needed. This is not about Stacy, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through his performance. This is about you. This is about you trying to murder your child. His face crumpled, and for a moment, the actor vanished, replaced by a man drowning in self-pity. Tears welled in his eyes. No. God. No. Violet. That's not what it was. You have to believe me. I was trying to protect you. To protect us. I gave him a look of cold disbelief. Protect us? By drugging my tea? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found charming. Now just a tick of a cornered liar. I got in over my head. He said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were allies against a common enemy. I had some gambling problems. I owed money. A lot of money. To very bad people. I stayed silent, letting him fill the void. This was it. They were threatening me. Vi. He continued, taking a hesitant step closer. I didn't move. They were threatening to hurt you. To hurt the baby. Once she was born. Everything I did, the insurance policy. The other things, it was all to get the money to pay them off. To get them out of our lives forever so we could disappear and be a family. Somewhere safe. The lie was so audacious. So monstrously self-serving. It almost took my breath away. He was trying to frame his murder plot as an act of love. A twisted form of protection. The agents in the van must be holding their breath. So your plan to protect our family was to induce a premature birth, hoping our daughter would die from complications? I asked, my voice dripping with ice. It wasn't supposed to be like that. He insisted, his voice cracking. Premature babies, sometimes they have problems. It's tragic. But it's natural. Insurance companies don't ask as many questions when it's a natural medical issue. My blood ran cold. He was admitting it. Casually. Callously discussing the murder of our daughter as a logistical problem in an insurance fraud scheme. He wasn't just a monster. He was a bureaucrat of evil. And if I had died from those complications? I pressed, holding his gaze. Was that also part of the plan to protect me? His silence was a confession. It hung in the air between us. Thick and damning. What about Stacy? I asked. Shifting tactics. Needing to tie all the threads together. Was destroying Dr. Beckham's life part of your plan to protect our family? 2. His head snapped up. Genuine surprise flashing across his face. How? How do you know about that? I know a lot of things. George. I said. Taking a deliberate step toward him. Turning the tables. Becoming the interrogator. I know about the overpriced medical equipment. I know you've been laundering money for Vincent Caruso for the last 18 months. I said the Namecaruso and watched the color drain completely from his face. The self-pity. The fake remorse. It all evaporated. In its place was raw, primal fear. He looked past me. Toward the windows, as if expecting to see shadows gathering on the lawn. Violet. Stop. He hissed. His voice a panicked whisper. You don't understand. These people, if they think you know, they will kill you. They'll kill all of us. They already tried to kill me. George. Remember? I said flatly. With your help. He stumbled back. His eyes wild. He looked at me then. Truly looked at me. And the last vestiges of his manipulative performance fell away. He saw the truth. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. You're wearing a wire. He breathed. The words flat and dead. Realization dawned, followed by a look of utter, soul-deep betrayal, as if I were the one who had wronged him. This whole thing, it's a setup. Just like my marriage was a setup. I shot back, my voice trembling with a rage I could no longer contain. Just like your love for our daughter was a setup for a payout. His expression shifted then, hardening into something ugly and desperate. The cornered animal was about to lash out. You have no idea what you've done. He snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Caruso doesn't forgive debts. And he doesn't leave loose ends. You think you've won. You've just signed your own death warrant. And our daughters. Maybe. I said. My heart pounding. Adrenaline screaming through my veins. But at least I'm not the one who tried to murder her. That was the word that broke him. Murderer. He lunged. It wasn't a shove or a grab. It was a full-body tackle. He was bigger, stronger, but he was fueled by panic. I was fueled by 3 months of rage and a primal need to get back to my daughter alive. I had spent the last 2 weeks training with Rosa, learning basic self-defense, how to use an attacker's momentum against them. As he reached for me, I didn't back away. I sidestepped, bringing my knee up hard into his stomach, right into his solar plexus. The air left him in a whoosh. He doubled over, gasping, his face a mask of shock and pain. It was all the time they needed. The front door burst open with the force of a battering ram, splintering the frame. The living room window shattered inwards as another agent crashed through. In a blur of motion, the room was filled with men in black tactical gear, weapons raised. FBI. Get on the ground. Hands where I can see them. George was on the floor, face down, with a knee in his back and his hands cuffed behind him before he could even process what was happening. It was over in seconds. Agent Santos was the first one to reach me, her hand on my arm, her eyes scanning me for injury. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? I shook my head, my body trembling with the adrenaline crash. I reached up and unclasped the necklace, the wire, and handed it to her. It's all there, I said, my voice hoarse. Caruso, the money, the misoprostol, everything. As to Agent Halda sobbing, defeated George to his feet and led him out the door. He turned to look at me one last time. The charming doctor was gone. The repentant husband was gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out man, his eyes filled with a venomous, bottomless hatred. This isn't over, Violet. He spat, his voice a low promise. It's never going to be over for you. But he was wrong. As I walked out of that house and into the crisp autumn air, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind for good, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. It was just the beginning of the end. And this time, I would be the one to write it. The evidence was secured. The confessions were on tape. The trials of George Louis, Stacy Ryder, and the entire Caruso crime organization were about to begin. The final act of our tragedy was about to play out on a very public stage, and I would be sitting in the front row. The trial of Dr. George Louis became the legal drama of the year. Court TV broadcast it live, and every news outlet in Boston assigned a dedicated reporter to the courthouse steps. It was dubbed the Hospital Betrayal Trial, a sensational title for a sordid, heartbreaking story. My life, once quiet and academic, was now public property, dissected daily by talking heads and armchair experts. I became a reluctant symbol of a wife scorned, a mother's fury, a survivor. I attended every single day of the trial. I sat in the front row, directly in George's line of sight, flanked by Gina on one side and Uncle Elliot on the other. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to look at my face and be reminded of what he had thrown away, what he had tried to destroy. Every single moment he sat there fighting for his life. The prosecution, led by a sharp, methodical assistant U.S. attorney named David Chen, built their case brick by undeniable brick. They started with the wire recording from our last meeting. The entire courtroom listened in rapt silence as George's voice filled the space meeting. To the gambling debts, the money laundering scheme with Vincent Caruso, and the cold, calculated plan to use misoprostol to solve his problems. Hearing it again, in that sterile, formal setting, was surreal. It was the voice of the man who had once whispered promises of forever in my ear, now calmly detailing my intended murder. George sat stone-faced at the defendant's table, refusing to look at me. Next, the forensic experts testified, confirming the presence of misoprostol in the tea canister from our pantry. Financial auditors detailed the intricate web of fake invoices and shell companies George had used to launder millions of dollars for the Caruso organization. Agent Santos took the stand and coolly recounted the details of the FBI's investigation and the sting operation that had ended with George's arrest. George's expensive lawyers tried to fight back with the only defense they had: character assassination. They painted me as a manipulative, emotionally unstable woman, a scorned wife who had used her uncle's power and her own knowledge of psychology to expertly frame her husband. They brought up my old, expired prescription for anxiety medication, trying to suggest I had a history of instability. Mrs. Louise, George's lead attorney, a slick man named Marcus Thorne, asked during a brutal cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you were unhappy in your marriage? That you felt your husband was drifting away from you and you were desperate to keep him?" I looked directly at the jury, then back at him. I was unhappy that my husband was having an affair and plotting to murder me and my child. Yes, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. That would make most people unhappy. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Thorne's face tightened. But he pressed on. Isn't it possible that you learned of your husband's debts, his indiscretion, and concocted this elaborate story as a form of revenge? The only elaboration in this story, Mr. Thorne, I replied, my voice hard as steel, is the one your client created to justify murder for money? The drugs in my system were real. The kick to my stomach was real. My daughter spending the first 3 weeks of her life in an incubator was real. Those are not elements of a story. They are facts. The most dramatic moment of the trial, however, came from an unexpected source. Vincent Caruso, facing a litany of federal racketeering charges and decades in prison, had cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify against George. He walked into the courtroom looking less like a mob boss and more like a disgruntled accountant. He was a balding, portly man in an ill-fitting suit. But when he spoke, his gravelly voice commanded the room. Yeah, I know him, Caruso said, gesturing with his chin toward George. He's one of my biggest disappointments. A doctor. Smart guy. But a degenerate gambler. Couldn't pick a winning horse to save his life? Mr. Caruso, Prosecutor Chen asked, did you ever threaten Dr. Luis or his family? Caruso almost laughed. Threaten him? I didn't have to. The man was his own worst enemy. He owed us a lot of money. He came to us with the laundering scheme through the hospital. It was his idea. Smart. For a while. And what about the life insurance policy on his wife? Caruso shrugged. A gesture of casual indifference that was more chilling than any threat. He mentioned it. Said he had a way to clear his whole debt in one shot. I told him, handle your business. How he handled it was up to him. As long as we got paid. His testimony was the final nail in George's coffin. He wasn't a victim coerced by the mob. He was a willing, if incompetent, partner in crime. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The court clerk's voice was steady as he read the verdict. On the charge of attempted murder, we the jury find the defendant, George Luis, guilty. A quiet gasp went through the courtroom. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charge of racketeering, guilty. Guilty. On all counts. I closed my eyes. A wave of profound, shuddering relief washing over me. Gina squeezed my hand so hard I thought the bones might break. George just sat there, staring blankly ahead, as if the words had no meaning. The judge sentenced him to 35 years to life in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. As the bailiffs came to lead him away in handcuffs, his eyes finally met mine. There was no apology there. No flicker of the man I once loved. Only a hollow, bitter resentment. The look of a man furious not for what he had done, but for the fact that he had been caught. Stacy Ryder's trial followed a month later. It was shorter. Simpler. She had turned on George, claiming he was the mastermind who had manipulated her, preying on her love for him. Her defense was to portray herself as yet another of his victims. I never meant to hurt anyone. She sobbed on the witness stand, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. George told me Violet was unstable, that she was planning to leave him and take the baby. He said she was going to ruin him. I was trying to protect the man I loved, but her performance was shredded by two key witnesses. First, Dr. Beckham took the stand. She had been flown in from her new home in Oregon. Her voice was quiet but unshakable as she detailed, with meticulous precision, how Stacy had systematically dismantled her career and her family with a campaign of lies and planted evidence. She presented proof that her ex-husband, the pharmaceutical rep, had been wiring money to Stacy for months after their divorce, showing it was blackmail, not a love affair. Then Sarah Chin testified, her voice trembling but firm, corroborating every detail of Dr. Beckham's story and describing Stacy's calculated cruelty. She provided the inventory log Stacy had forced her to sign, the final, damning proof of her fraud. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't speak about the affair or the betrayal. I spoke only of the moment she had stood over me, her face twisted with hate. She looked at me. I told the jury, my voice low and clear, and she said, "Stay down where you belong." And then she kicked my 8-month pregnant belly. I paused. letting the words hang in the silent courtroom. That is not the action of a woman in love. That is the action of a predator. The jury agreed. They found her guilty of felony assault, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and perjury. Ms. Ryder, the judge said, her voice filled with unconcealed disgust as Stacy stood for sentencing. You have demonstrated a pattern of calculated cruelty that shows a complete and terrifying lack of empathy. You are a danger to any community you are a part of. She was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, 10 for the assault that nearly killed my daughter, and 5 for what she did to Dr. Beckham. As they led her away, she turned and glared at me, her face a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. This isn't justice, she spat. This is your revenge. I met her gaze and held it. Sometimes, Stacy, I said quietly, for her ears only, they're the same thing. Walking out of the courthouse that day, with the cold November wind on my face, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt quiet. The war was over. The monsters were caged. I could finally go home to my daughter and begin the long, slow work of healing. The legal battles were finished, but the rest of my life was waiting. 2 years passed. They were years of quiet rebuilding, of rediscovering a rhythm of life that wasn't dictated by court dates and legal strategies. They were years of firsts for Mabel, her first laugh, her first steps, her first word, which, to Gina's eternal delight, was book. The scars on my heart began to fade, not disappearing, but softening into a part of my history, a testament to a battle fought and won. I stood at the podium in the university's largest lecture hall. The polish would cool beneath my fingertips. The room was filled with the eager, expectant faces of graduate students. 2 years after the trials, I was no longer Mrs. Louise, the tragic victim from the headlines. I was Dr. Violet Louise. My doctoral dissertation, From Victim to Victor, Trauma Recovery and Post-Traumatic Growth in Survivors of Intimate Partner Violence, had been accepted with highest honors. My research, born from the ashes of my own experience, had broken new ground, and the university had offered me a tenure-track position as an assistant professor. Survival, I told the captivated audience, my voice resonating with the confidence I had earned in fire, is not merely about getting through the crisis. It's about what you build afterward. It's about using the rubble of your past to construct a foundation for a stronger, more resilient future. In the front row, Gina beamed, her sharp lawyer's edges softened by a proud, sisterly smile. Beside her, Uncle Elliot held a squirming, 2-year-old Mabel on his lap. My daughter, my fierce, determined little girl, had grown into a vibrant toddler. She had George's dark, curious eyes, but none of his hollowness. She had my stubborn chin and her Aunt Gina's sharp, inquisitive mind. She was perfect. She was my miracle. Reclaimed. After the lecture, the 4 of us walked across the sun-dappled campus quad to our favorite coffee shop. Waiting for us at our usual table was Dr. Beckham. With the evidence from Stacy's trial, she had successfully appealed the medical board's decision. Her license was reinstated. And Uncle Elliot, in a move that he called correcting a grave institutional error, had offered her a senior position in the obstetrics department back at Metropolitan General. Her children, now teenagers, had come to live with her after their father was arrested for an unrelated embezzlement scheme, a fittingly ironic end to his own story of betrayal. How does it feel, Dr. Louise? Dr. Beckham asked, a warm, genuine smile on her face as we sat down. Like justice, I replied, and the word finally tasted sweet, not bitter. Like the world. Slowly. Is making sense again? The epilogues of the people who had tried to destroy me had written themselves. George was serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary in another state. His medical training, I'd heard, made him a valuable asset in the prison infirmary, which afforded him a level of protection from the general population. He would be eligible for parole when Mabel was 27. He sent letters sometimes. Thick envelopes forwarded through Melinda's office. I never read them. They were filed away. Unopened monuments to a life I no longer recognized. His apologies, if that's what they were 25 years too late. Stacy Ryder had tried to appeal her conviction twice, claiming ineffective counsel and judicial bias. Both appeals were summarily denied. She would remain in prison until Mabel was old enough to graduate from high school. She was a ghost, a nightmare that no longer had the power to haunt me. Vincent Crusoe, in exchange for his testimony, received a 12-year sentence, and his cooperation had led to the indictment of his entire criminal network. The anonymous friend who had sent me the photograph was never identified, but Agent Santos suspected it was Caruso's own ambitious second-in-command, clearing the way for a takeover. My own ending was still being written, on my own terms. Melinda had helped me secure a significant civil settlement from the hospital for their negligent hiring and supervision of Stacy Ryder. The money wasn't a prize. It was restitution. It paid for my legal fees, finished funding my education, and established an ironclad trust fund for Mabel's future. More importantly, a large portion of it was used to seed a new victim advocacy program at the hospital, a resource I had desperately needed, which now provided legal and psychological support for others facing domestic violence. Any more letters from prison? Gina asked, bouncing a giggling Mabel on her knee. He's still writing, I said with a shrug. And Melinda is still filing them. I don't need his explanations. I have my own. Good, Uncle Elliot said firmly, his eyes twinkling as he handed Mabel a sugar cookie. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. As we sat there, a makeshift family forged in crisis, sharing coffee and watching Mabel carefully use a plastic spoon to perform a checkup on her teddy bear, I felt a sense of profound peace. She declared that morning that she wanted to be a baby doctor, just like Uncle Elliot and Dr. Beckham. I thought about how much had changed. I had lost a husband and a marriage, but I had found my voice and my strength. I had lost my naive trust, but I had gained the wisdom of clarity. I had lost the woman I was, but in her place, a far more powerful one had risen. The late afternoon sun caught the little silver locket that hung around Mabel's neck. It was a gift from Gina. Inside, it didn't hold a picture of a smiling couple. It held a tiny photo of me and Mabel, taken the day I brought her home from the NICU. Both of us were small, fragile-looking, but our eyes held the same fierce, fighting spark. Survivors. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Rosa, who had transitioned from nanny to my indispensable head of security and practice manager for my small but growing private counseling practice. New client just called. Said she saw your interview on NPR last week. She's in a bad situation at home and needs help getting out. Can you see her tomorrow? I looked at my daughter, laughing as she declared her teddy bear was all better. I looked at my sister, my uncle, my friend, me family. I looked at the life I had built, not in spite of my trauma, but because of it. I thought about the anonymous woman on the other end of the phone, a woman who was where I had once been, trapped in the dark and looking for a light. Tell her I have an opening at 10 a.m. I texted back, because this was the ultimate truth I had learned. The best revenge isn't anger or hatred. The best revenge is a life well lived. It's using your survival to build something beautiful, something that lasts, something that helps others find their own way out of the darkness. It's a quiet, happy afternoon in a coffee shop with the people who truly love you. As we walked out into the golden light of the setting sun, with Mabel chattering about her toy stethoscope, I realized that George and Stacy had inadvertently given me a gift. They had shown me the very worst of human nature, and in doing so, had revealed the very best within myself. They had tried to break me, and instead, they had made me unbreakable, and that was a strength I would carry with me always, a light I would use to help others find their own. The nightmare was over. The rest of my life was just beginning.